I really appreciated the song service and also the prayers because I feel like this is a preparatory message. So really, I'm going to be talking about preparing for revival. And the precursor I want to just state is we can talk about revival all day long, but how are we preparing? And that's really the most important thing. Are we asking for the gifts that we talked about a few weeks ago of the gifts of the Spirit? Are we developing gifts that we already have? Are we digging deep ditches that we can draw, from when times of revival come? I was just talking with Frank, and my load at work, even though we're in the midst of a pandemic, has increased pretty significantly in one of the departments that I'm working in. And if I hadn't done the preparatory work ahead of time, I would be completely swamped right now. But I'm kind of drawing from, in the natural sense, some ditches that I dug in the past to prepare for this time. And it doesn't always happen like that, but luckily in the situation I'm in right now, it's a little better than it could be. But that's how we should be really preparing spiritually. We want to be putting the work in, really digging into the Word, developing messages. I was talking to the pastor before service, and he's got this log of messages that he can draw from when he needs those. And really, nobody knows the day or the time of the end, but we should notice what's going on around us in the world right now, that it's kind of God telling his people, get ready, because things are going to start happening. We know very well the children of Issachar, they were those who were aware of the signs of the times. And I feel like God's called this church to be, and the people of this church, to know what those signs are so we can be prepared and be ready. So people of God, get your hearts ready. I guess that could be a title too. But the reference of Scripture I really want to dig into tonight is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 6 through 7. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 6 through 7, and it says, For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. And so in the first verse there, verse 6, it talks about basically the illuminating factor, that God, he can speak light into existence when there's only darkness upon the face of the earth. And we obviously know Isaiah 60 talks about, when it's the darkest, that's when the light can shine the brightest. But not only on the earth, God can do this in our lives. When we're going through a period where it seems to be real dark or dry and we don't really feel his presence like we're crying out for, as I kind of started the message, it's that time that God can come and shine his light the brightest. There might be things in our lives that have been hidden or in the dark or maybe dead for a long time, and that's when God shines his light. Those things can be transformed, they can be renewed, they can be refreshed or awakened. I have this plant that Leah gave me, and if you know anything about me, I'm not very good with plants, so I said, if you're going to get me a plant for my office, get me one of the plants that's like the least maintenance, because I forget to water it and everything. So she got me this snake plant, which basically, if you know about snake plants, it's very low maintenance. I mean, very low. And I still almost killed this thing. Like when it was through the winter and everything, I was changing offices, and the office I had it in, it didn't have much light, and I forgot to water it for probably about a month. And so I'm like looking at it one day when I walk in my office, I'm like, man, that's really sad. So I started watering it a little better. I put it into a spot where it was getting more light, and honestly, within a day or two, it shot right back up. I trimmed some of the dead edges and different things, but I just thought it was a cool little picture of, there might be some things in your life that maybe have started to die spiritually, or maybe God hasn't shown his light on it yet in your heart. But when that happens, when the light of his Spirit comes, it makes everything new. It brings to light things that you're not even aware of that are in your heart that need to change. And so just another small story, and I know I've used this as an illustration before, but when I was in Bible school, one of the duties was that we had to go through the boys' dorm and actually kind of like sweep up the dust of the floor and then mop it. And the guys, there was a lot of guys there when I went, so it was pretty dusty, but the lighting in that hall is pretty dark. So when you're going through and you're just kind of like hoping you're getting everything. Well, the one time I was doing it and I wasn't paying any attention, and I'm just, going about it. And then all of a sudden this burst of light shone through. I think the sun was starting to set a little bit. And this burst of light shone through, and I looked around, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is horrible in here. There's cobwebs everywhere, and there's dirt on the floor, and it just kind of showed me that that little picture in time, when God's light shines in our heart at the right time, it can bring to light so many things that we never knew were there. And I think with all of us, God is doing this in our lives, and sometimes it's a little bit painful. But we need to keep asking God to shine his light on our hearts. We want to continually have opportunities to yield to his Spirit. And we want to take advantage of those opportunities too. I know sometimes in my own life I felt like something God was putting his finger on, but I wasn't responding to it. And I feel like now is the time to start allowing God to really dig into our hearts. If we go to verse 7, it talks about how we have this treasure, the treasure of God in his gospel and his Spirit in earthen vessels. And to me, it's a really humbling thought. And the more I begin to learn about who God is and what he's done and what he's going to do, it's just really humbling to think that God would choose us as his vessels for his Spirit to flow through. And when we think of vessels, we think of, maybe what capacity they have to hold something, or, what is inside of them, basically. And so, I pose the question to you all tonight, what is your vessel filled with? Are we being filled continually with his word and his Spirit? Do we allow the water of his word to be turned into joy in the wine of his Spirit? And that the Gospel of John, it's like every time I open the book of John, I just love that book. But when Jesus is at the wedding and they run out of wine, and there's a number of empty vessels, I guess, and he tells the servants to pour water into the vessels, and then he turns the water into wine. And so just that thought of, if we're empty, we need to be filled with the water of the water of his word. And so that should be something that we do on a daily basis, is to get into the word, to really study and to dig in and ask God, even if we're not up here speaking or doing those things, we need to really be rooted and grounded in the Word of God. And then what Christ did is he turned that water into wine. And so, as we're filling ourselves up with this water of the Word, Christ can turn that into the flow of his Spirit. And that's when people can actually experience that in our lives. And so I feel like when this revival that's coming, I feel like there will be, joy will be a pretty prominent theme. I know in Nehemiah's revival, it talked about the joy of the Lord was their strength. And so, that thought of wine being as joy also, I think it's going to be, the people are going to be drawn to the joy of the Lord in God's people. And that's going to be a factor with people coming in, that they know the truth is in someone's life and it's reflected the way they live. The next thought would be the need for a sanctified vessel. A sanctified vessel. And 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 20. 2 Timothy 2:20, it says, "But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor." And so just this first thought of vessels of gold and silver, and I think God is very interested in redeeming the qualities in our lives that will reflect Him. And oftentimes these are worked out in the fire, and generally it's through opposing forces. If you think about how love can be worked out, it's generally through someone who's unlovely in your life, someone who you really can't stand in a sense, but God puts that person in your life to work out qualities in your heart. If you're talking about peace, it usually comes in the middle of a storm. So you have to go through a storm to really experience the true peace of God. And then if we talk about true joy, it's usually in the midst of mourning or a very sorrowful situation. And those are just three, but these are things that, we can really recognize when God, and ask God, to be doing these things, because there's so many, we make so many decisions every day, and there's so many things that we can get caught up in doing. But if we're not careful, we kind of miss out on what God is trying to do in the midst of the situation. And so if we're going to God every day and just saying, "Lord, whatever I experience today, make it redeemable for your glory. Make it something that will teach me a lesson about who you are or what you're doing," because gold and silver are metals that can be that are refined in the fire. The fire doesn't destroy these metals, but it enhances and it strengthens them. I just love that thought that, there's always going to be fires in life, but a fire can either refine something or it can destroy it. And so the next part of this little verse here in 2 Timothy 2:20, it talks about there's also vessels of wood and of earth. And wood and earth, wood can speak of humanity being full of self and of the flesh, claiming that you're worshiping God with your life, but there's no reflection of Christ in it. And I feel that this is a lot of the church. They're worshiping God with their words and maybe they think they're actually doing something for the kingdom, but God's not in it. Christ isn't reflected at all, and it's sad to me because some people, and I think there are genuine people that are actually, even if they're in a church that may not be completely redeemed, they generally are following after God, but it's just hard to see so much of the church world not reflecting Christ at all. The promotion of just about every fleshly thing right from the pulpit, it's sad to see. And I have a lot of friends who I grew up with that are really into that movement. But that's not going to last in eternity. The other thing is about the earthly vessels. So if you're living for temporary pleasures, if you're not storing up anything that will last for eternity, we know that verse talks about some ministries or people will get to heaven and find that their works were as wood, hay, and stubble. And it's interesting because God can use people and ministries and vessels that aren't sanctified for His purposes still, but we don't want to be categorized under that type of ministry. We want our works and our life to really count for the kingdom. I was thinking about this the other day, but growing up, actually my parents still do, but we have these Baldwin bonfires that are their homes way out in the country, and just about everyone in our family and from around will kind of bring their scrap from work they do on their house, and these piles get massive. Sometimes the flames are like 30 feet high and whatnot. But no matter what's in that pile, after that fire, it's all ash. Like, everything burns up. It doesn't matter what's in there. Obviously, if you're putting certain things in there, they might not burn, but just about everything is reduced to nothing. And I was just thinking about that the other day, like, God, just please, like, redeem the things in my heart. I want my life to really reflect you, and I want those things that last for eternity, because what good is it if you get to heaven and you don't have, everything you've done didn't count for anything. And if we drop to verse 21 of 2 Timothy 2, it says, "If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and prepared unto every good work." And so the first song we sang was, "Purify my heart." And so if we're allowing God to purge us, to take those impurities, the imperfections in our lives, and to really work on them. And it can be a long process. It's not done overnight. But if we're allowing God to do the work, that's when we can be a cleansed vessel for God to flow through. And so I asked tonight, maybe God's kind of putting his finger on something in your life. I know he has been in mine. And what is that dross? What's that imperfection or impurity that he wants to work out in your life? James devotes a whole chapter to the tongue and how difficult it is to tame. And really, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So, maybe it's something in our mouth, or the words that we speak about other people, or even the confession we have of ourselves can be not pleasing to God. It could be our thought life. There's a constant battle for us to really ask God to purify our thoughts. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And so, we want to have God's thoughts for other people. We want to have God's thoughts, what he thinks about us, to be true in our life. And really, that can be a really difficult one, because the mind is like a battlefield. The enemy is constantly trying to get a hold of your mind and your thoughts. And it could also be our actions. What are we doing in our lives? Where are we going? Who are we associated with? Because those things also can reflect what's going on in our hearts. And so in all these areas, God can move, God can redeem us, and really work to purify our lives. And so I feel like in my heart, the Lord has been stirring a fresh conviction to just come to a fresh place of sanctification. And so just in closing, let's look at verse 7, the second part of that. 2 Corinthians 4, 6, and verse 7, "That the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us." And this is really the ultimate goal. We want people to see Jesus and not us. When we are ministering or we're doing something that God has called us to do, we want anything of us to allow Christ to be the one shining through. And that can be really difficult, because there's so many motives of our hearts that have to be tamed and different things. But really, we want our lives to be just a conduit of what Christ can do through us. And this week we had a gentleman in our building who was working on some electrical at my branch. And it was interesting because he was doing everything that was above the ceiling tiles. And that was actually, the main thing. Like, that's where all the cords were run. That's where all the connections were made. But once he put those tiles back up, you never seen them. You never would have known that they were there unless you had a sense for what was going on. And I was just thinking, man, God is, God wants to use us, but we need to take kind of like a back, behind the scenes, a stance like that. We don't want ourselves to be the ones that are constantly promoting ourselves or those types of things. We want God to be really the one that shines through. And I think it's interesting because God himself is doing so many things behind the scenes, like even in our nation, even in the things that are happening right now that are going on. But he needs vessels. He needs people to move through. And so, we are the ones who, if we can allow God to purify us, if we can allow the work to be done, then we're just going to be able to present a message that's clear and will reflect Christ. And so we all know revival is coming. The other night I was talking with Carl, and he was talking about the power of God back in the earlier revivals, how it kind of started breaking out on all different types of denominations. Even in the Catholic Church, people were being filled with the Holy Spirit, and this is really what we need to see happen throughout the world. And the church body at this point is supposed to be the most unified, and yet we're probably the farthest from that, the most divided it's ever been. And so we think the question there is, how is that going to be mended? And it's really only by the power of God. But we need to be those who are getting ready to be used to bring the church together again. He's looking for clean vessels to use, vessels that have been emptied of themselves, but also filled with his word and his spirit. And so our heart's cry really needs to be, Lord, more of you and less of me. Christ was the greatest example of this. His whole ministry, he cried out, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. And this needs to be our heart's cry. Lord, please, purify our hearts, touch us with your cleansing fire, and, use us as vessels to shine your light. Amen.